Hello and welcome back to the Teaching Movement Science podcast with myself, Lincoln Blandford. Today, we're talking recovery strategies, and in the context of the female performance course. We get to hear from Wendi Carrington, a triathlete and triathlon coach seeking to improve her performance and also return to the mythical island of Kona to take part again in another Ironman. We also get to hear from Jack Davies, S&C coach, educator, and also content developer within this particular course. Adding evidence-based insights around recovery is Professor Adam Hawkey. And I think what we're going to find out is sleep's important. Of course, we know that. Eating right, also, we know that too. But then what? Well, everyone moves differently, or so we'd say in some of our other education, or perhaps, and as we explore within this particular conversation today, everyone might recover differently. And we look at some of the strategies that might help them do that. I really hope you enjoy this fantastic conversation. Jack, I'm going to start with you. You've done these before, so you know how these go.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on again, Lincoln. It's very exciting to jump back on and do these sort of podcasts to kind of explore where we're at with female health in particular. So my name is Jack Davies. I am a lecturer out of South Gloucester and Stroud University. So my main areas of sort of expertise or interest, if you like, youth athletic training, female health, as well as looking at kinematic performance in relation to dynamic performance, particularly high performance sport. My training background is sort of semi-professional rugby player, graduated sort of coaching once hung up the boots, and sort of stepped into coaching, particularly had an interest for sort of fitness and health. So I've combined a career of doing personal training as well as sort of strength and conditioning for sports performance, and then have stepped into a sort of a role with where I can sort of impart my wisdom, my knowledge gained from over the years, as well as doing some literature, like research in sort of recent years, which is pretty exciting, with some cool topics sort of in mind and sort of on the agenda. So yeah, that's where I'm currently at, and that's me.
All right, thanks, Jack. Great to have you back as ever. Professor Adam Hawkey, I'm going to pass this over to you next.
Thanks, Lincoln. Thanks for the invite, and it's great to join this panel. I'm Adam Hawkey. I'm a professor of sports science at Savitha Institute of Medical and Technical Sciences. I'm also an honorary lecturer in sports medicine and biomechanics in the School of Medicine at the University of Dundee. And I've been involved in sport and exercise science for more than a couple of decades now, and that's included being a director and deputy chair of what was the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences, that's now been chartered. So it's the Chartered Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences, so bases to cases. And I've spent a couple of decades in academia, but also in an applied role, working with primarily elite sports people from Formula One, Premier League football, Olympic and Paralympic athletes, and also some more extreme examples in terms of explorers, so mountaineers, astronauts, and military personnel. So a kind of wide range of kind of experience, but working with kind of some very elite people. So that's what my main background is in.
All right, incredibly comprehensive, excellent stuff. So, okay, so Wendi Carrington, over to you. You are our performer, our athlete, representing, I guess, the female cohort tonight. So, hello, welcome.
Hello, thank you for inviting me, Lincoln. Yes, I'm a lifelong athlete, really. I've tried nearly every sport that there is, but now I've sort of got to sort of almost retirement age. I've taken up a full distance triathlon, which I started in about 2017. And I have recently got better, which I didn't expect to do, and managed to qualify to represent Team GB age group for long distance triathlon, which I did last year and the year before. And then last year I managed to qualify for Kona, which was lifetime's dream. Never thought that I would ever get to the coveted Hawaiian island. The only way you can actually compete at that one is to qualify. I came second in Hamburg and stood next to Kat Matthews on the podium, which was just incredible. I did actually get to talk to her and shake hand, which was quite nice. But it was a dream come true, and I came in the top 10. So my goal now is to get back there and have another go. My children think I'm crazy because I turned 60 last year, and maybe I should be slowing down. But I'm not slowing down. I'm going to keep going. I'm also a British triathlon coach, so I help my local club, which is the club at Grantham, the Beaver Tri Club. So encouraging the juniors to sort of follow suit, and hopefully inspiring them and the adults to have a go at things and just keep going. I mean, I love exercise. I love sport in any shape or form, and as long as I'm able to, I will keep going.
All right, so we can see with probably that sport as well that I think our topic this evening is particularly relevant. But let's find out if that is the case based on what we're going to explore. So we are diving into the world of recovery strategies. So how do we offer some sort of definition or description of what this is?
I'm happy to kick it off and then see if we can get some further insights. So I think it's recovery is as you say, it's I think it's been around for a little while, but research in particular has expanded sort of dramatically in trying to understand how we can have an impact on one's sort of turnaround time or the recovery from a particular stimulus or stress on the body. So in terms of a definition, it's I'd go as far as to sort of call it a biopsychic sort of response or recovery from some sort of stress or stimulus that's been placed on the body. So kind of encompassing of something physiological as well as psychological. So it's all kind of areas encompassed with that, and appreciating that it's kind of multifactorial in terms of how we might recover the body from a stress that's been placed on the body, whether that stress is some sort of competitive fixture, some sort of training regime, something tactical or technical that's quite demanding cognitively, and the sort of accumulative effect of that kind of psychological stress. And when I say stress, that sounds quite pedantic, but it is some sort of stress on the body. And again, we lift sort of an external resistance when we go for a run and we challenge our sort of metabolic stress on the body. There's going to be some sort of knock-on effect from that, and that sort of body's ability to return to homeostasis, try and find that equilibrium, whether that's physiological or psychological. It's quite key how we manage that. So my sort of definition of how I look at it, when I certainly from a practical application, is thinking, how can I support that restoration of the physiological as well as psychological? That would be my kind of interpretation. If that was to offer some sort of definition, that would be how I would look at it.
Okay, so there's a stress imposed, and we're making clear here that the stress could be mechanical, it could be other types of stress. So Adam, I'm going to open up to you as well, because I think that might be nice to add on to what Jack's given us there.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with everything Jack said there. I think when we're looking at recovery, and we're particularly talking about recovery from a training perspective, we're definitely looking at that from a multifaceted kind of perspective. Jack's obviously mentioned in detail there about some of the physiological functions, and you can look at that from a slightly chemical perspective in terms of those energy stores, repairing muscle tissues, those kind of aspects. And Jack rightly mentioned kind of bringing the body back to that kind of homeostasis level. I think in some respects, we're looking at dealing with certain negative consequences of training, maybe around fatigue, and minimizing things that may cause injury or reduced time to then get back into another kind of training regime round, whatever you want to call those. But I think we're also looking at recovery as an aid for performance going forwards. So there's, although they're interlinked, you could effectively look at one of those as reducing any negative impacts on bodily systems, be that mental or physical, or social in some ways, if we're talking about overloading socially, but also from propelling us forward in what we'd call in injury terms. I know we're not talking about injury now, but in terms of a return to play. So when if we can shorten that time before we can train again, then that's obviously beneficial for performance wise as well.
No problem at all about injury. We love a bit of the injury on this particular conversation. It's certainly very much down my street, so no problem whatsoever. So we've got physical, we've got psychological, we've also mentioned then social there. So it's pretty holistic, it's pretty comprehensive. We've got this then positive, negative influence of the stress imposed upon us. We're trying to minimize the negative, maximize the positives. This seems to be what we're trying to do with this. Before we dive into, I guess, what the science is saying, as it were, the evidence, Wendy, can you give us a little bit of a sort of an idea of your sort of typical training day, training week, and then we sort of see how recovery fits into that, and then we'll spin back round, huh? Okay.
I mean, what I would say is my recovery has changed as I've got older, and my body has needed different things. So as a younger athlete, I was able to run on empty. I would eat when I was hungry, and that didn't seem to affect my performance whatsoever. I got a natural energy that was always there. But as I've got older, I found that I need to fuel better, and I need my rest more, because otherwise I crash, and then that's not good. But my typical week, I'd say week, because it does, I normally do my training plan for a whole week or a month at a time, and I try to have one rest week or lighter week within that month, so that it rotates around and doesn't all become more and more hours. So I do vary it, but I would typically have 3 swims in that week, which anything up to an hour and a half. In the summer would be longer because I'm outside. I'd be doing 3 to 4 bike rides in that week, and maybe three runs as well. So I kind of have a base layer where I start off at about sort of 6 to 8 hours, and then as I gradually build up over, say, 30 weeks, I'll end up doing nearly 20 hours or 25 hours, because the events that I'm training for are long events that are over 12 hours, and some under 12 hours if I can get there. But because they're so long, I need to train for that amount of time. And what I found is that as I go on and get to the higher level of hourlies in a week, then there is more chance that I'm either injured or I'm exceedingly tired. And I think Jack said something about, mentally you get stressed. And that's very true. When you've got a training plan, if you have missed a session, I have now learned that you just leave it. You just go to the next one. But for a long time, I'd get very stressed about the fact I hadn't done something, rather than actually spending that day resting and recuperating. So now if I have a rest day, which I do every week, I'll have one day that's a rest day. I do something completely different, so that I'm not even thinking about training. I go out in the garden, or I, do something that is completely nothing to do with what I'm training for.
So that day is completely dissociated from your typical training.
Completely.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And you don't sort of linger back in the mind, go, oh, I could nip out.
I do. Unfortunately, I'll come back to my laptop and go on to Training Peaks, and then start making my training plan for the next week. And I have to tell myself, no, don't do that. Do something else. Because otherwise I then don't rest, because I'm still, my brain, I might not be doing anything physically, but my brain is still, going through that process of what I should be training for. And I'm one of these athletes that as closer I get to the event, the more nervous I become. And that is quite hard to manage also, to the point where about a month to go, I'm actually dreaming that I'm doing the event. And I'm one of these people that dreams quite vividly. So I'll be swimming in my sleep. I'll wake up trying to put my helmet on, ready in the transition, and I have to really find other things to switch my brain off, because I find that tires me out more than the actual physical side. So coping with that as a recovery is a real thing.
Yeah. So you've got cumulative demands mounting over this period of many weeks, but you have identified that having this rest day is incredibly important, but also this rest week. And
yeah, so it's a lighter week, so that you're not putting as much pressure on your body, so that you've got a chance to, try and, chill out, forget about, not keep push, because I find if you keep pushing and you keep climbing, you actually get to a point where you don't get any better. You actually, you then have to stop completely and recover, because you can't keep going, because it's too much demand on your body.
So we've got a nice framework here then. So I'm going to dive into, what have you tried, I guess, in terms of recovery strategies? You think, oh, I'll give that a go, and you found it hasn't worked at all, compared to the ones that have seemed to work, which it seems at the moment, you just removing yourself from the sport for a little while is the thing that works.
I tried to go to bed early. That was one that just did not work for me. I thought, no, I'm going to go to bed early. And I'm going to, make sure the room is nice and dark, and I'm going to do all these breathing exercises, and then I'll get a nice, peaceful night's sleep. It didn't work at all. My body rhythm didn't like it. I was just lying there with my legs twitching, and it was pointless. So I discovered that doesn't work for me, but it might work for somebody else.
Okay, that's a beautiful opportunity to bring in sleep hygiene right here. So, Adam, do you want to sort of dive into that one a little bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first interesting thing is that, and Wendy's drawn upon this really early, which is great, because we can get there is no one-stop shop for everybody. None of, we're going to talk about a lot of strategies. We're going to talk about a lot of interventions, and different types of recovery, and some of it can be a little bit hit and miss. Some of it is well developed in science, and the backing for it is huge. However, it doesn't work for everybody, and I think one of the things that Wendy's spoken about there, it has touched on kind of circadian rhythms, and I'm personally, and I'm not an athlete anymore, Wendy, so I'm in complete awe of you for doing what you do, the kind of distances that I would have to go and jump in a car for. But I think it's really important to be aware that people's rhythms are different. I'm definitely a night owl, and therefore going to bed early doesn't really work for me. However, the principles behind the importance of sleep are still there. And I'm sure if I said to everybody, think of a number that people think we should get that amount of sleep every night, and probably most people would jump up with a number 8 or somewhere between 7 and 9, because we know that's what the number is that we're kind of advised we should be getting. However, if I was to ask the same question and say the average shoe size for males or the average shoe size for females is maybe an 8.5 or a 6, how many people in a stadium full of people have that size shoe? Not everyone's going to be able to fit in that shoe. And if someone told you they were getting 11 hours sleep, you might say, blimey, you've slept really well. When if they normally get 13 hours sleep, for them, that's a real deficit for them. So I think that the key things are that sleep is fundamentally important for us. It helps with tissue repair and immune function and brain maintenance and a whole range of hormone regulation, whole kind of other things. But people adapt to that in different ways. And we would generally look at things, and Wendy's mentioned some of them, and I'm glad she mentioned them. As you said, it's a great segue in. Things like having a dark, slightly cooler room, making sure you're not using tablets or kind of electronic devices with kind of the famous or infamous blue light an hour before you go to bed. If you need to wear an eye mask, I go to sleep with earplugs in, even though I don't live in a particularly loud environment, but that stops anything that and Jack's mentioned psychological stuff, and I'm not a psychologist by any shape of the imagination. But if you think about, something might wake me up in the night, then that can automatically stop you sleeping better, but it also stops any other noises waking me up. Having a thermoregulatory duvet, for example. We might touch on this in a bit more of a kind of case study way in a minute, but when I go and sleep away anywhere, I always have a mattress topper, because you've got no understanding about what the bed you're going to sleep in is going to be like, for comfort. I take my own pillow with me. So those kind of aspects are really, really beneficial from a sleep hygiene perspective. And I'm happy to go into a bit more detail about that when we bring up like some specific examples, but hopefully that's like a little bit of an insight into some of the sleep concepts.
No, excellent. I mean, I was thinking, well, does anything beat sleep as a recovery strategy? I mean, it's great that Wendy's already identified, well, no, that didn't really work for me going to bed early, but does anything actually beat sleep, I guess, is the question we're going to ask now.
I mean, I'm gonna say no, but I mean, sleep is a fundamental perspective in all kinds of recovery, be that physical, be that mental, and yeah, nothing else. Without sleep, we're a walking time bomb in terms of health and performance risk.
I mean, I found that I can actually sort of almost, maybe I'm Mediterranean in the past or something, but having a little nap sometime during the day actually helps me rather than trying to force myself to sleep later. And if I just close my eyes and rest, sort of, maybe after lunch sometimes I can get sort of 10-15 minutes, but that's enough to kind of just reset a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully people aren't getting it during this podcast, but we all get a slump at some point during the day. And there's good evidence to suggest that, 10-20 minute kind of nap at some point during the afternoon, not too late and not too long, is really beneficial for kind of replenishing your body during the day if you so need it.
Yeah, I'd just jump in there real quick, Adam. I have read some stuff. I think you'd be a little bit more knowledgeable on it than myself, but I think it is quite apparent that in that sort of 10 to 20 minute bracket is probably optimal, versus even if you're stepping into kind of 40 minutes, it starts to actually have almost an adverse effect. You start to feel a bit sluggish. Actually, it's not kind of done what it's needed to do. And I think I have seen some little snippets of sort of research surrounding that. What is an optimal, if you're going to nap in the day, what is the optimal time and what is the optimal sort of duration? It does seem to be all leading around that kind of 20-minute mark.
What's our so on we've got 4 people here. Who has a nap in the afternoon?
Oh, I wish.
I do, but not every day.
Yeah,
I do. But I mean, especially if I've got up very early. I mean, like this morning I was coaching at 6 o'clock, so I had to get up at 4:45. So my day has already been made longer by getting up early. So, if I've then gone for a swim afterwards, then I'll come back and I will catch like 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes just to kind of reset.
Okay.
And how do you, just on that timing, sorry, Lincoln, I was just going to ask Wendy, just from an interest perspective, how do you regulate that 10 to 20 minutes? Do you set an alarm on your watch to stop your...
No,
does it just happen to be 10 or 20 minutes?
It just happens to be, but I think that having children, I don't sleep. I mean, the only time I sleep really like soundly, like dead to the world type sleeping, is when I've got jet lag or something. Otherwise, I can't sleep with earphones in or stop hearing things, because I wouldn't be able to bear not knowing that I can't hear if somebody needs me. I'm always on alert as to whether I can hear something or not. I think it's something that stems back to my childhood. I spent most of my childhood living on a boat, and you always had to keep an ear out that the wind changed or there was an emergency or something. And that's just in my psyche now. So I can go to sleep for like 10-15 minutes and then just wake up. I know I wouldn't sleep any longer.
All right, so we've nicely delved into some sleep hygiene. We've also explored some different patterns and habits around sleep. So what after sleep would we choose? What other things work?
I would say nutrition. Sorry, I just
No,
jumped in there.
that's great. You said it because that's kind of where I was going. I mean, personally, I would definitely say that sleep is your kind of winner. And I know we're kind of moving on from that, but something that you can control sort of through the day, particularly if you do have a congested sort of regime of training, whether you're a high performance athlete who's a lot of your week is dedicated to that, if that's what you're contracted to do as a sort of an elite athlete. If you are, just someone who's looking to stay engaged with exercise, but you have a full-time job, you have children, it's all different types of stresses on the body, but things that is a constant challenge, particularly in the very fast-paced world that we live in. Trying to manage what you eat and what you ingest, and trying to remember that food is fuel to support function rather than it being the very sort of fast food or what is most convenient and less nutritional sort of options that are available or kind of right in front of your face. So I think something that we can manage and we can control on a day-to-day basis is what we are, to a degree, is what we are sort of ingesting and putting into our bodies. So I think, food, whether that's the type of food, if we are a high performance athlete or if we are just, preparing for exercise, some sort of physical activity, it's the type of food, the total amount, the timing that we're ingesting those foods. Those are things that we can control, and that metabolic function, psychological recovery as well, making sure that we are fueling the body to prepare and support with sort of tissue repair, and all the things that Adam has alluded to. I think nutrition sits right underneath there as quite a key thing that we can control. Sleep is king, but your ability to kind of refuel your body to support that as well is going to play a vital role. So maybe rather than thinking just sleep in isolation is the number one, or it is the only one, how we kind of support that as well could play a key role, of which I totally understand. This is the last thing I'll just say for this little segment is it's not going to work for everyone. And Wendy, you kind of alluded to that as well, which is really important, that there is no one size sort of fits all. There's no sort of, one sort of successful kind of recovery strategy, but it's just appreciating that, the kind of proactive, as it's kind of referred to now within the literature, sort of methods that are, how you consciously manage your time and strategize in the lead up to a bigger event, or something that's in a week, something that's in a month, a year, something that's tomorrow. Some things that we can control that are going to support preparation for that as well as recovering from that event. Food plays a massive role in supporting that.
Where are we then in terms of specific food? So for a while we had beetroot. We've then moved on to other specific foods that people have said, oh, this is good for recovery. So where are we now with this?
I'm also a trained chef, so I'm quite lucky. My background is in cooking, and I spent a lot of years sort of catering, and so I don't like processed food. So I eat quite healthily, as do my family, but it's understanding what you put in your body. If you put rubbish in, then it's not going to help you with anything, including your recovery. And I have found that, fueling after, getting the timing right is something that is probably individual to a lot of people. But I found that if I don't eat, enough after I've exercised, and let's say I have a busy day and I don't have time to eat properly, and I just grab something that's not particularly healthy because it's easy, by the next day when I go to do some training, I crash, and I run out of energy, and I think, why am I so tired? And then I think, I know why. I didn't fuel properly. And to me, that's become sort of very important. And I've found that as I get older, that's become more apparent than it would do when I was younger. It's almost like if I don't put any fuel in, I don't get any energy out, and it's almost instant. Whereas before I could draw on my reserves, now if I do that, I end up depleting my muscle, and I have to be really careful that my body, I mean, I've got a very high metabolic rate because I have had it tested. And so I burn off everything that I eat, even if I didn't do exercise. So by doing exercise, I burn off even more. And so I actually have to eat more than I would like to, just to refuel myself. And that's something, as a, with what I do, I have to monitor quite carefully.
So there's been a change in sensitivity to nutrition with time, and reflecting back on, I think also how nutrition has evolved alongside performance. I can remember the bodybuilding community very much pushing what they were eating and how they were eating and how much they were eating specific times. Then we had the cyclists and the pasta parties. So again, yes, sort of where are we now in 2026 in terms of any superfoods or things that actually have not stood the test of time?
Well, I think there's a few things to follow on from that with. I think first of all, Jack's absolutely right, Lincoln, that although we're talking about these as separate entities, because that's the way we're talking about them, we mentioned right at the start, this is a kind of multifaceted approach, and therefore all of these affect each other in some ways and interact and complement or don't complement each other. And I think if we're thinking about kind of sleep and optimal levels of sleep, we can do the same for kind of nutrition. So it's going to be individualized. I think the word superfood sometimes is taken in the wrong context. And again, there's no kind of magic bullet in terms of if I eat this, I'm sorted, and that's where a lot of these beetroots and things came along, and everyone knew that you should drink lots of orange juice because there was lots of vitamin C in it, when there were other fruits that had far more vitamin C in them for what you needed to consume. So I think in some ways, and again, I'll say this every time, I'm not a nutritionist, but I have nutritionists that I work with. So I think we're looking at, from a general perspective, making sure that we have a balanced diet, and I'll come back to that in a second more specifically. Obviously, when we're talking about recovery, you immediately think of protein, and you think of that enabling kind of protein synthesis in muscles, repairing tissue damage during exercise, and we know that we know things like eggs and chicken and other sources are really great for that. But I think sometimes other sources get forgotten a little bit, in terms of the importance of carbohydrates to kind of replenish our depleting glycogen stores, and aiding kind of the transport of amino acids to muscles. So we shouldn't think about those. We shouldn't forget about those. We shouldn't forget about some of the fats that we need. So omega-3, we've spoken about kind of brain function, and omega-3 is fundamental for that. So oily fish and seeds, flax seeds particularly, and they can also help to reduce muscle inflammation, and some other aspects that are really crucial as well. That things like magnesium, so electrolytes and magnesium, and that links back into sleep because magnesium's been shown to help us sleep better as well. So that there's a whole range of things, and I think also, and this may not apply to our more elite athletes, but it's definitely a trend amongst younger people, is to take lots of protein and take protein in its natural source. So I'm going to just take loads of a protein drink because I know I want to build some muscle, and we need to be aware. Wendy's already said about not eating processed foods. As a chef, that's great. We should be trying and consuming natural products as much as we can in their unprocessed form, but also there's a real concern currently for younger people for having too much protein and not enough fiber, and then having all kinds of bowel issues and to the extremes of bowel cancers raising in the young. So I just wanted to make sure that we're although we know that there are some golden tickets in here in terms of kind of leucine rich protein, we also need to make sure that we understand the benefits of a balanced diet in its entirety.
Just on the observation of this, that what I'm seeing now with the protein story is it's almost that people are eating the same way that I was seeing bodybuilders eat in the 90s, and thinking, oh, okay, that's a lot of protein you're having. but that's been sort of adopted as the standard, and the word protein's been stuck on many things. You think, well, yeah, it's got protein in it, sure, but it's got lots of other things in it as well. Okay.
Just quickly to add to that as well, sorry, Lincoln, a lot of the some of those questions that are looming that are thrown out, particularly on social media. And if you trust social media, then you're probably going to be left even more confused than when you started in terms of what's the right types, which again, Adam has nicely alluded to, just some examples of different types of proteins, carbohydrates to fats, and just what are their kind of physiological function, what are they actually doing for the body, but actually also thinking of, okay, well, what is the right amount? I know UK government guidelines, as an example, it's 2,500 calories for a male, it's 2,000 calories for a female, and they give a general, as you say, a guided plate. And again, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a nutritionist, but just from an applied sort of advisory point of view, it is thinking about what you're putting in and having a look at some of the literature just in terms of the total amount relative to that individual. Although it might not be the absolute answer, it's generally a pretty constructive approach if you're thinking about individualization for a given athlete, male, female, senior, junior, 10 years training age, 10 minutes training age, thinking about what is the sort of a relative total amount that can guide them. Think even just for protein, if you've got, I'd say Wendy's sort of training regime, just looking at some of the examples you gave of what maybe a high training day looks like, what maybe a microdosed sort of amount, what is the kind of a minimum dosage you require to sort of make some sort of adaptation that you're looking to target versus a complete rest day. Protein consumption from those collectively, and that's using some of the studies I've looked at in some recent systematic reviews on the topic of that. You've got rugby playing nations, Australian sort of football, soccer, or football as we call it over here. You're looking in the territory of sort of 1.9 to sort of 2 grams to sort of average at 2 grams per kg of body mass per day on a kind of a high stress day, or what you might call a high trauma day. So if you are a rugby player, a high collision based sort of athlete, or you're doing something quite stressful in the gym, i.e. strength and power, then actually that is going to be metabolically more demanding in those subsequent sort of 24, 48 hours afterwards. There is going to be a lot of tissue damage that needs, that optimal sort of support during that. As Adam alluded to, the sort of chemical reactions and what the body is going to try and promote is that kind of anabolic response. So trying to expose those muscles to higher concentrations of those amino acids. So actually, what is the relative amount? So the likes of a more challenging day, it's going to be about 2 grams versus if it's a rest day, some of the literature is in the territory of sort of slightly less than 1 gram per kg of body mass, because the body is not requiring as much nutrient input on a rest day. Actually, the Arnold Schwarzeneggers of the world, the bodybuilding, the Lou Ferrigno did promote this, more is better. And I know there's other facets and factors sort of surrounding that, but that did kind of explode and give some real sort of go forward to, well, more is better. Actually, with some of the more recent literature, it is making it relative to what the individual actually needs. And because not every individual has access to a around the clock nutritionist, actually, what can the masses kind of control in terms of the amount? It's following a little bit of the literature that's out there, and that's the same with your micronutrients. Again, your magnesium, your iron, calcium, those sorts of things, where what is a relative amount, and it's in the literature available to kind of see what those kind of amounts are. So some stuff to sort of maybe follow in sort of later modules that we're looking at as well. But yeah.
Okay, so we've got a normalized to mass, but also normalized to, I guess, activity levels there for nutrition. So we've done nutrition, we've gone through sleep, we've got some of the big hitters. I want to get into what else. what else works, but also maybe some of the things that come along that maybe haven't worked. So let's have the ones that have worked or there's evidence for.
I know we've kind of closed off nutrition, and that's absolutely fine. I just would group into nutrition like the hydration side of things as well. So not only for fluid intake, but also for when we're linking it in with nutrition, using that kind of hydration to transport nutrients around the body. It's just they just kind of go a little bit hand in hand. So I didn't want to make a big thing about hydration. We all know we have to drink lots. And depending on activities and whether we're out in the Sahara doing a marathon rather than running along Brighton Beach for the recent Brighton 10K or something like that, it'll differ accordingly. But obviously, hydration is a fundamental part of nutrition as well.
Just before we go into what sort of doesn't work, again, I think just to kind of categorize them in terms of different methods outside of sleep and nutrition.
Yeah.
Again, I think it was more recently defined within the literature by Kelman and author. It was kind of termed, as I've kind of briefly alluded to, your proactive methods are your kind of sleep quality and managing your sleep and nutrition. But then outside of that, you've got your passive, which are kind of in a rested state. So although sensationally that might be quite stimulating, whatever that might be. So examples of that before we go into them might be your cold water immersion, myofascial release. Wendy, if any of these you've come across them, then please do obviously jump in. But then your sort of percussive therapy, something that's become quite apparent in recent years, and really kind of commercially it's been a bit of a home run, although I do still think, and this might be where we start to get into it, but like the jury might still be a little bit out. I think some literature has proven it that I've read, and some people that I've spoken to, not so sure is the use of the massage gun, giving that kind of percussive kind of, it's very sort of convenient, etc. versus sort of active methods, which might be you're quite literally in an active state. So you're doing something that's promoting localized or global blood flow to remove sort of negative toxins from the body as a result of that metabolic acidosis that sort of promotes lactic acid, which is what we're trying to remove from the body. We're doing more active sort of therapy, whether that's you're going for a run, you're going for a swim, you're going for a sort of a bike ride, whether it's on-feet or off-feet conditioning. You kind of two kind of categorized methods, which this is where I think we start to maybe get into the nitty-gritty of, okay, well, what, why, and how do you do sort of passive and active methods? But actually, Wendy, this would be nice to hear from you. Maybe what has been used and maybe what you felt has worked, what hasn't worked, would be interesting as well.
Okay, so one thing that works for me, which I've found, is the cold water therapy. So I have an old barrel outside, and I go in it when I've been for a long run, and I find that just really helps my legs to calm down. If I've got jumpy legs, which I do get sometimes at night time, when I'm at the height of training and I'm doing quite a lot, I find it quite difficult to actually sit down and say, watch the television and chill out. I'm like, want to go again. So if I go and sit in the barrel in the cold water, then that just helps me press reset. And it's almost like the colder the water, the more the reset button gets pressed. So that's one thing that I found really works for me. Some friends I've said have a go and they hate it. They're just like, it's too cold. I don't know how you get in there. But for me, it works. That one works. I was
only sorry to interrupt. Just quickly,
That's okay.
It would be interesting to get your feedback in terms of sensationally achievable for you and actually quite therapeutic is what I'm kind of deciphering for you. That's quite therapeutic. That's sort of one part. But then the second part, do you feel in terms of that recovery, 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, do you feel like for you, your track record suggests that it does work for you?
Yes, I it works therapeutically in the first instance, but if I've been for a long run or a long bike ride and I come back and I'm quite tired, if I sit in there for like 10-15 minutes until it's, I try to change the water quite often so it is cold, I do find that I sleep better, so that again it helps me to go to sleep, but I also feel more rested. My muscles seem to go into a more rested state after they've been immersed in cold water.
And that's really interesting, because that's essentially what it's designed to do, and that's what a lot of the research says, that it will kind of reduce inflammation and soreness, or delayed onset muscle soreness, DOMS that we call it, and swelling, particularly after high intensity exercise. So if you've been for some long hard runs, that should enable you to return to training kind of faster because of that. And I know some of my friends and colleagues at Mayo Health in the US have done a lot of research in this area, and shown that it kind of constricts blood vessels, which reduces kind of metabolic activity and swelling. So that doesn't surprise me that you found that. I guess the negative side of that, and it doesn't seem that you've brought anything up with this, is that it can restrict kind of long-term kind of muscle development, muscle growth, if used time and time again. But it again, horses for courses, seems that it seems to work really well for you. And interestingly, you've brought up some of your friends. I don't know whether they're runners as well, but that hasn't benefited those.
They just don't. It's too cold, and they just don't. They don't like the sensation of it.
So, how cold is cold?
It's straight out of the tap or out of the hose into the barrel. In the summer, obviously that temperature comes up, but at this time of the year, it's probably less than 5 degrees.
Wow. Okay, because I've got your notes here, and it's very nice. So you've got your sort of 10 to 15 degrees centigrade, 10 to 15 minutes recommendation. So that's the 10 15 that's the sort of the way to go, or is any benefit of going colder? Is it a tolerance story, or are they the ones that have shown the best evidence?
Yeah, I think again it's partly tolerance. I mean, the temperatures Wendy were talking about, if I was talking about going in some cold water, it wouldn't be that cold. So again, that it depends on exposure time as well, and it depends if you're looking for that real acute recovery immediately afterwards, or whether you're going to spend a bit of time in there to have a longer, I'm not going to use the word soak, because that's not what I describe as a soak. Again, without sounding like I'm sitting on the fence, it does depend in terms of what you're looking for, what type of session you've done, and what the individual can tolerate. When I've worked with some Premier League teams and kind of England squads at St George's Park in the Midlands, they've got baths there that you go into, effectively walk around the bath and then go into a hot tub afterwards for the heat cold of things. And those are the kind of temperatures that Wendy's talking about. But you kind of, some people have to build themselves up to those. So you can't just jump in straight away.
Okay. So that was a nice point around the may limit cross-sectional area gain, so hypertrophy muscle size. Is this because it's limiting the inflammatory effect? I mean, what do we think is sort of driving that?
Yeah, some of the insights that I've kind of read around it, and so I think ultimately, in terms of the mechanistic response that we're looking for, is naturally forcing the body to kind of protect the body. And when I say protect the body, protecting the vital organs. So when you're exposing your body to such an environment, as we do if we are in a cold environment, we start to shiver, and that's our body trying to, a kind of involuntary response to kind of, heat the body up. When we expose our bodies to that kind of environment, what we're essentially asking the body to do is kind of get an increased blood flow, and if anything, moving blood from the sort of upper lower extremities to the middle of the body to kind of keep the vital organs warm and keep them functioning. And as a result of that, we're kind of, we're essentially, what we're trying to do is flush out as much of those negative byproducts, the toxins that we've produced as a byproduct to exercise, to kind of flush out into the intestines as much as possible. And that's kind of what we're trying to target. So in terms of like how we sort of use that, there are kind of a few different strategies, I suppose, and like we say, with timing, with sort of how cold that might be. That's kind of what we're looking at in terms of the mechanism that we're trying to promote, to kind of, utilize it as best as possible. There are different sort of like derivatives or alternative options that you can use to that, whether that's contrast water therapy as well, to kind of trying to create like a pumping effect, whether that's sort of doing cold water immediately into kind of hot water. I've personally done that before. Confuses the body a little bit in the sense you're going from this very, very nice sort of relaxed environment to suddenly your body kind of goes into sort of, response mode.
All right, so we are entering the world of temperature modulation here, so let's dive into that as well. So contrast water exposure therapy, this alternation of hot and cold. Same questions really. Effective? Does it work? So I'm going very binary here.
Yeah, I think it certainly has its place. And again, just in terms of the mechanistic response, you're kind of trying to create this kind of arterial kind of vasoconstriction, vasodilation, so create a sort of the pumping effect to allow blood to sort of, kind of be accelerated, whether that's some sort of, I don't know if occlusion is the right word, but kind of trying to kind of restrict to then kind of flush. So the idea is you're going from one environment, which is going to kind of stimulate that, to another environment, which is kind of going to slow it down, and kind of regulate it. And you kind of, I think Adam, you might have a bit of insight on this as well as Wendy. I think it was 2 minutes in one environment, switching to 2 minutes in the other environment. And you're kind of doing that across 10 minutes, 10, 12 minutes. So there is kind of 3, 4, 5 sort of alternate splashes, if you like, between them to kind of, in the immediate aftermath of exercise.
Yeah, again, one of those things where there's a whole range of processes that go through. What you described there makes a lot of sense. But there's also the kind of expanded model of that. And you could look at doing heat and cold, but doing them kind of more separated. So if you're looking at kind of cold therapy in those initial hours, or particularly in the first 24 hours after training, that could be, I'll mention that word again, Lincoln, that could be after like an acute injury, but it could be just about inflammation or immediate soreness straight away afterwards. And as Jack has quite correctly described, that is when we're looking at restricting those blood vessels to reduce swelling, flush out toxins, etc. And then you could look at applying heat therapy, in the second block of 24 hours up to 48 hours, where you're looking at releasing kind of muscle spasms, increasing blood flow, which Jack described really well, in terms of that, restricting and then increasing. And then obviously that increasing that blood flow then re-pushes that oxygen back through the muscle that you're looking at. And that heat can be used to improve flexibility and range of motion, etc. And then how you play with that contrast depends on kind of the effect you're trying to do. And I guess in some ways, if you're looking at kind of immediacy or acuteness, if you're looking at inflamed or swollen muscles, which could be from a particularly high intense training session that Wendy's already described, or a weight training session, or particularly something where you've gone through a lot of eccentric contractions, that might be that you want to use cold on that to reduce that inflammation. If you're a bit stiff or a bit tight, then you might want to look at using heat, and it's those, or you might want to alternate between the two of them. So I think there's lots of theories around heat and cold. And although it feels like it's been around a long way, I still think we've still got a lot to learn about correct temperatures, correct exposure, correct alternating between the two of them. And I feel like, obviously, it's not been around as long as nutrition or sleep research, but it does feel like something that's been around for a long time, but we still don't know. I'm not going to say that much about it, but we still need to learn a lot more about it. And I think, and that also highlights just how fortunate, lucky, informed Wendy is, in terms of she's found something that works for her. That's great. And some of these things require a little bit of a playing around with,
I mean, also the contemporary or modern athlete has all these options available to them, and at least there is some evidence for them now. 20 years ago, we were in a very different place. We're going, well, I've tried this and it works for me. Okay, great. But there wasn't really the extent of literature we've got now, from what I perceive anyway. It's a similar theme, but I want to get into the compression garment story again. I imagine I can remember these appearing, everybody had them, and then the critique started about, yeah, but you've got to get it right in terms of what compression means. And again, it seems to be very individualized about, is there sufficient compression? So where are we now in terms of compression?
Well, I'll jump in there. Whenever I've done an event, I always put my compression leggings on and I sleep in them from the minute. Otherwise, in the next morning, I can't move, and it definitely helps me. But I do have a pair of leggings that I've had for the last 10 years. It sounds a long while, but a friend of mine makes medical grade compression. So she originally invented these they were for people who had operations and had to have sort of specific sleeves for their arms or whatever. So she then developed these leggings. So they're very different from they're just plain black, but they're medical grade compression. And I've tried other ones and they don't do the same. So I've been very lucky with this one pair that I have, which I will never get rid of, because they do help. And I wear them after I've done an Ironman. I sleep in them and keep them on till the next day. And it definitely helps me to recover, in my opinion.
As Wendy nailed it for us there, is that sort of pretty much what we need to be considering?
That's fantastic to hear. They've sort of worked for you, Wendy. With compression garments, I'm a little torn in terms of I think the mechanism essentially is it's this idea of compressing extremities to kind of again promote localized kind of blood flow and therefore kind of promote improvements in removal of byproducts. Just if I'm being a bit critical of it, and it's not to be pessimistic, it's just because maybe I'm a little bit unsure, haven't maybe read up on it as much, and I appreciate maybe I'm coming at it from a research lens where actually it's great to hear from a practical, particularly sort of hands-on of using it. But for me, there's just a number of factors that probably might still need addressing in terms of what is maybe an appropriate pressure in terms of the actual compression of the garment, what is kind of the length that we are wearing them, duration actually that we are kind of applying it for, and then the location itself. And even with all those different factors, is it a little different from one individual to the next in terms of maybe body composition, sort of phenotypes, training backgrounds, maybe the sort of degree of stress that's been placed on the body, and then matching that. So without trying to kind of I'm not trying to create a roadblock, is there still quite a lot of insight into what is an appropriate kind of compression that's actually applied to kind of elicit the results that we're looking for, which it only opens up more questions. And I could be totally, if Adam jumps in or Lincoln, in terms of well, actually there might be some literature out there or something that's sort of demonstrated that, but I definitely think there's room for them, of course. I'd love to hear from other people, just what might appear as a slightly pessimistic view.
I'll only add in what I knew when I was exposed to this within the sort of S&C programs, and that was it was very much dependent on who was wearing them and the amount of compression you were getting, and all the things you just described in terms of how long. So all those parameters were important. Yeah. So off the shelf probably didn't work, but you could get benefits from them. But it was very much depends. Okay.
I'm a little bit like Jack in terms of I think it's something that hasn't been as researched as much as anything else, and I'll put my hands up and say it's not something I've looked into in a great amount. I think it still has a little bit of the feel of and obviously Wendy's going to counter this slightly from her own experience. I do think it's very much of an applied thing rather than a fully researched aspect. And I think for me, it sometimes can feel a little bit like a fad. I'm not saying it is a fad, but it seems to be like, I'm going to wear some compression socks because all the distance runners are wearing them on the track, and it looks like that's the next thing to do. So if I'm honest, and again, apologies to anyone who uses these religiously, is that I haven't looked into in enough detail to give you the same kind of answers that I would like to on some of the aspects that we've discussed previously.
So I want to then start to pull in some of the more, I guess, I'm going to say they were sort of mechanical, but they might be sort of active, passive. No, actually, probably they're going to be passive. So the foam rolling, self-marshal fire release. And also I can see here we've got vibration, exposure to vibration. Foam rollers. When did I first see these? About 2000, 2001. The physios were using them. I thought, oh, they look good. They look, oh, have a go. Oh, that's very pleasant. Oh, no, that's really hurts, but it seems good. And then they seem to have stayed with us since then. What's the evidence?
I'll agree that as a sort of a academy product of sort of Cardiff rugby, we were told to use them around the kind of 2003, 2004, 2005, and as a 16-year-old, it was kind of thrusted onto these would be helpful for kind of recovery. Use them where you feel sore, and just roll over it where it hurts. Constructive kind of stiffness, and where it feels really quite tender. You're probably doing something right to kind of alleviate that. So you did it. They've been around for a while. I think it's in that sort of 2-3 decades now that they've kind of been around. And again, the idea is, I think there's a number of different kind of mechanical kind of focuses with it in terms of it's, again, keep coming back to it, but just from a metabolic kind of perspective, promoting blood flow, more from a kind of a tissue, like a fascia tissue, trying to kind of act as some sort of adhesive, like trying to essentially kind of, I don't want to say, it's trying to soften it, trying to help the extensibility of muscle to kind of promote flexibility within the muscle upon it being quite tight as a result of kind of exercise. I think there is quite a bit of literature kind of leading into it as a promotion of it. The simplicity of using them, the convenience, foam rollers, financially very achievable. So they kind of make sense. Whereas again, the same approach might be through manual sort of muscle therapy, whether that's some sort of sports massage, or if you're lucky enough as maybe a high performance athlete or someone who has access to that, you're doing that quite regularly. That's another option, but that might be, that's more time maybe dedicated towards that. Whereas a foam roller is something you can take with you everywhere. There is, I think, some research around the ribbed foam rollers where it's kind of rather than it just being a foam roller, which is, can't describe it. Please, someone else jump in if I'm struggling to kind of.
They're more uniform, aren't they? The sort of a uniform flat structure, even though they roll.
Yeah. Yes.
They haven't got the bobbles and the knobbles on. Yep.
Versus the kind of ribbed ones, which is essentially, I think, trying to be able to kind of target trigger points better because of the kind of intermittent sort of ribbed nature to them. Some of the insights into the ribbed ones are, I think, that you might be able to target sort of damaged tissue, disrupted kind of fascia, that you would use one of the ribbed foam rollers. Now I think they're becoming a little bit more commercially like viable options, or the better options to look at. Whereas I still think you're using the kind of traditional ones, but they are a little bit maybe. Here we go. Yes, a visual.
So
brilliant.
Again, once upon a time, these ones were you got one of those ones. Whereas now I can go down to Aldi and buy one for £5. So it does seem the world seems to have adopted the foam roller as standard wear for performance, or whatever performance means to you. Wendy, I imagine you've got a foam roller.
Yeah, several foam rollers. And I have a sort of, I do it and it does help, but I do find that it's quite difficult to get yourself in the right position if you're doing it yourself. Whereas having a massage, people put their hands on you, they can actually find the bit that hurts or the bit that needs the attention. But I know that when you've got a sore bit, it's actually quite difficult to do it yourself because it hurts. So, but yes, I do use a foam roller with varying degrees of success because it's,
okay.
It's
Yes. So some knowledge of anatomy, I think, helps with these things, as in where the application is, and with a view that this tissue versus that tissue, I want to target that one as opposed to this one for good, for there's some sort of reasoning behind why you're doing that. Jack very nicely gives us the metabolic, the mechanical. I guess there's also some sort of neurophysiological component to this as well, in terms of how muscles are recruited, or maybe we're sort of impacting on that.
And again, pain as well.
Yeah.
The perception of pain as a sort of a neurological kind of response is dampened as well. You almost have to heighten the sensation. It's going to be sort of triggering on the muscles, but then the kind of the response you're looking for is to kind of dampen that kind of sensation of the pain sensation.
I think there is some evidence in terms of that release, as Jack's already well described. I do also think there's again, not as a psychologist, there is a psychological concept to this as well, in terms of I've rolled my muscles, therefore I've relaxed them a little bit more. Oh, I feel a bit better now. Wendy's absolutely right. There's no replacing here for a qualified physio or sports therapist, but this might be the best that we can do. And you're absolutely right, Lincoln. And Jack's mentioned before about costs. They're very, very cheap. They're 10 a dozen now. Everywhere you go, you can buy them anywhere. And they do seem to have exploded. And although there's not that much scientific evidence for them specifically, I've just held one up. I've got one. We use them a lot in sporting and recovery settings. And obviously there's other examples as well, like kind of massage balls and the peanut shaped device that can maybe help you get into those kind of areas that you can't quite reach. But Wendy's absolutely right, and her insight here is incredibly vital, because as she said, sometimes you don't want to cause yourself that little bit of pain from that release. You'd rather someone else inflicted that on you, because they'll actually go through with it and make that happen. But I do think there's a place for them. I think if you've been for a run or you've just done some training and you want to just have some myofascial release, then that can be a useful way of doing that.
I've seen people use scaffolding poles. I mean, just the commitment there is quite high.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So
Lincoln, you mentioned vibration. It will be remiss of me not to mention vibration. As someone in this room did their PhD on vibration training, so I probably ought to. I don't work for any companies. I don't sell any devices. We found positive results and negative results in terms of performance. I guess the main benefits from vibration, and again, this can also be something that can be seen as a bit of a fad. And the first thing I'd say is that it is not a replacement for anything else, either training or recovery, but supplementally can be quite useful. There's a lot of evidence to show that it's effective in reducing delayed onset muscle soreness. There is a lot of evidence to show that it can be beneficial to expose yourself to some vibration before training, and then that reduces the onset of muscle soreness later on. So I think when we're talking about vibration, we can group this into whole body vibration, which is the kind of Power Plate, Nemes, Bosco. Other products are available around that you might see in gyms that probably, no offense, people don't know how to use properly, and sometimes the instructors don't know exactly how to use them because they are seen as a potential fad. And then we've got that kind of localized vibration, which could be handheld vibration devices made by those companies, or Jack mentioned earlier about massage guns. There's little evidence about massage guns, but again, something that we use regularly with sports performers. And I think that there is some evidence that vibration helps to promote kind of muscle activation, reduces the inhibition of muscle fiber recruitment. So that can be used for as a beneficial form of warm up, but I wouldn't condone it as that is your warm up. It's just an additional supplementary way of doing that. I do the same for recovery. It's not a wonder tool that, if you've seen any of the adverts that are out there from decades ago about vibration, I just spent 10 minutes on a day and it made me like really fit and healthy. No, it didn't. But there are benefits from that. And I think if we're looking at post training as vibration, or we're probably looking at a low frequency, so 10 to 20 hertz, being applied to that muscle either directly or on a platform. If we're looking at that pre-training, then we're probably looking at a much higher dose to activate those muscles, probably about 40 to 50 hertz for a prescribed period, kind of pre-training. And I've already mentioned those kind of potential benefits in terms of delayed muscle onset soreness. But and I'll make this very clear, despite being a fan of vibration training, they shouldn't replace other kind of recovery or preparation methods that would include other forms of rest, recovery, dynamic stretching, anything else that we might do as part of a warm up. And I think the one thing that's important to say for people that are listening to this, and I may be going, oh, maybe I should go and undertake some vibration training. One thing that this, in the same way that being exposed to cold water immersion, if you've got blood flow issues or anything that is a blood pressure worries, you should go and seek some advice before you go and do that. It's really important that if people are going and taking part in any vibration, that anything like epilepsy or any previous injuries, disc injuries or anything, people shouldn't be standing on a vibration platform and deliberately shaking their body. So I think that's probably a good point to mention that. So although I'm a fan of it, there is some evidence out there. Again, it would need to be considered and targeted according to what someone was using it for.
Can you really very simply give us a mechanism for why that may stimulate or aid performance? So what do we actually target in terms of a mechanism there?
So essentially it's a neuromuscular intervention. There again, it's something that's been researched quite heavily, and I've published tens of papers on it. We still don't know exactly how it works, and that might sound a little bit strange for a professor and someone who's done their PhD on it to say we still don't really know quite how it works. There are a number of theories. One is that pre-neuromuscular activation. So you're almost, in layman's terms, preparing the muscle for activity before you start going and doing some form of training. So that's already been activated. The inhibition of antagonist muscles.
Okay.
If, without talking too patronizing to anybody, our muscles work in pairs. If the agonist is opposed by the antagonist, so bicep curl, the antagonist is the tricep. If you can release that tricep slightly, then the bicep can contract more forcefully and more readily. So there's some theories around those. There are some simple theories that it just helps to warm the muscle fibers up. And therefore that's kind of a pre-activation. So those are the main theories behind that. But again, we don't fully know how that works. Recovery wise, that it's slightly different, but the same sort of principles.
Yes, recovery. So that was our topic this evening. Anything we haven't covered that we want to bring up in terms of recovery, because I'm aware that we are progressing nicely into Monday evening. So other topics we want to sort of just touch on before we start to conclude this now?
I think the only thing we probably haven't discussed, and I've said this 4 times now, so apologies to all the psychologists out there. I'm not a psychologist, but I think there are some things in terms of mental recovery, mindfulness, stress management. So whether we're looking at ways to reduce cortisol levels, preventing chronic stress from affecting the length of the recovery period that we might be going through, whether we're talking about, and I know Wendy said that deep breathing didn't work for her in terms of sleep, but whether meditation and yoga and other things and deep breathing will help with that mental side of things, because in the same way that our body can be burnt out, so can our mind as well. And therefore, again, apologies for not being a psychologist, but there must be some mental recovery strategies that are really important. And I think, touching back to what Wendy said right at the beginning, she tries to have a rest day, and whether she meant to or not, she made it very clear that recovery wasn't just physical. That was taking herself into the garden, doing something completely different, that wasn't thinking about triathlon or distance running, and that would have automatically given her some kind of mental headspace as well.
So anything that has worked on that side of things, Wendy, where you've talked about sort of removing yourself from sport, but anything else?
Yeah, so I mean, I met you through Paul, through doing strength and conditioning, which is something that I added into my own training, because I was doing it before, but on my own. And one thing that that does for me is it's specifically targeted at me, and it helps me immensely. But mentally, it also helps me because it's a positive thing. And I found that if I'm in a positive mood or a positive frame of mind, then my training goes much better. Everything goes much better. Equally, if you're in a negative frame of mind, you either have an injury or something's not going quite right, that really does affect how I recover. And I think that, that almost the happy endorphins that are released from being, happy, positive, and enjoying your training when things are going well does, I feel, helps me to recover. If it's not going right and I'm watching the clock and I've had a bad day, then sometimes I feel even tireder than I am, and that's whether that's psychological or it actually is. I'm not sure, but I found that if I can keep myself in a positive frame of mind, even if things are not quite going according to plan, and do something that I know creates that positive environment, then I recover quickly, or I recover better, and I bounce back and I want to train the next day, rather than thinking, oh no, I don't want to get up, or I don't want to do that. And that has a big effect on my personal training.
I think that nicely ties into the biopsychosocial that you talked at the very start there, Jack, that the holistic approach, we have to be somewhat reductionist, linear in our conversation, because we've got to about one thing at a time, but we're clearly seeing that is pretty multifactorial. There's lots of interactions between these different factors as well. Any final thoughts here as we start to round this up? The answer might be no.
I would say I think we've all alluded to it in some way, that there are so many different recovery strategies out there, some that have been well documented, whether that's in a lab-based sort of research sort of protocol where it's been kind of investigated on different populations, some others which maybe not so much. But I think it's also just appreciating, yes, it's a holistic, it's a collective approach. Maybe it's not necessarily, I think maybe those listening into this, to those who are looking for sort of recovery strategies, and similar to nutrition, what do I put into my body in terms of helping me sort of refuel to recover, versus what do I use as a recovery strategy? There's so much thrown out there on the internet, on social media, from different experts, whether they're trying to promote something or not. It's actually just considering there's an element of trial and error to see what works maybe for you under what context. So if it's doing some sort of resistance training, strength training, looking at trialing a couple of different sort of focuses or approaches, whether that is sort of myofascial release, vibration training, cold water immersion, and seeing, I think, it's something that maybe we haven't tapped too much into, which might be able to give a like an objective answer. We've looked at maybe how it, Wendy responds sensationally. That's maybe a little bit more subjective, but is there objective ways of actually monitoring, is this having some sort of an impact? And that will start to give the masses who are looking to employ recovery strategies, whether it's passive, active, or both, or proactive as well, might start to give a bit of insight as to, well, is this working for me? Is it not? So again, thinking about some different recovery kind of monitoring strategies. Again, whether that's looking at sort of resting heart rate maybe the next day, that's looking, if you have access to it, looking at blood lactate, sort of creatine kinase levels, if you have access to kind of measuring that, oxygen saturations. All of these are maybe a slightly more in a kind of a high performance environment, but is there some sort of objective way that, or a combination of objective and subjective way that you could kind of monitor, is this working for me, rather than kind of shooting in the dark to see if it's working? Trial and error is going to be something you're going to have to consider with this, to see which one works best for you.
Okay, so that personal profiling, I think it's coming. Individualized health's coming in various formats. No doubt it will reach this point is here in recovery. Okay, more final thoughts?
I think just for me, and hopefully this whole session has highlighted that, is that, you know, recovery is a multifaceted beast that comes in all shapes and sizes and forms, and there isn't a magic pill for it. There isn't a magic answer for it. There's a bit of trial and error, and no one form works for everybody. And without saying go and try everything, you know, there's a method that might have to be followed to find what works best for you. It sounds like from Wendy's experience, she might have found some of those, but yeah, you know, just be aware of all of those. And I think the final thing to say is that they all interact with each other. We said that right at the start. You know, we looked at them in silos, and you can look at them that way, because if you're not sleeping well, then you need to work on your sleep. But it might be that you might need to have more magnesium to help you sleep better, or the sleep might be affecting other things. So they need to be viewed as a whole holistic, multifaceted approach.
Very nice. Okay, so Wendy, just over to you. Any just final thoughts there, really?
Yes, I mean, what I would say is that, you know, I have learned over time that recovery is one of the most important things in a training plan, because without recovering, you can't carry on and do what you love to do. So you know, people need to kind of take that on board if they are training for any event, or you know, that they take time to recover and they take time to think about what works for them. I personally keep a diary, and I put faces, you know, whether it's a happy face or an unsmiley face, just to monitor how I'm feeling, to see whether something worked or didn't work. Also keeping a track of the hours that I've trained. Sometimes you look at it and you think, oh my goodness, now I know why I'm tired. How much recovery did I have in there? Be it whatever method that we're using. If you don't actually put time aside to have that recovery or to implement it, then it isn't going to have an effect at all. So for me, it's very important that I factor that into any training plan that I follow.
Very nice. So monitoring and also looking at the hours, actually attending to the exercise. And yes, I mean, there is the idea that you get fitter when you rest. During the performance itself, you are sort of the inevitable consequence of doing that is you're going to fatigue out acutely, but the fitness happens, I guess, when you've sort of gone away and got those good adaptations helped by your recovery strategies. All right. So thanks, everybody, for coming to this and sharing your wisdoms from various perspectives. And
thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, Wendy, it was lovely to meet you as well. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you for inviting me. It's nice to sort of discuss it with other people, and you know, it's as a coach, it's something that I'm always passing things on to people or helping other people, and you know, mainly from experience. But it's always good to sort of discuss these ideas and to sort of, you know, see what works for, you know, what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for somebody else. And you know, also different ages, you need different strategies.
All right.
Thank you very much for inviting me and having me along. It's been very enjoyable, and it's always nice to talk about the things that you're interested in and passionate about. So hopefully that's been useful to people.
I will say goodbye and thanks for everybody's input. Maybe we'll have another one. We'll do another topic. See you soon.
Okay,
Lovely.
bye.
Thanks,
Thank you very
everybody.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.